All right, first item on our agenda is our consent items. Take a motion for that.
Motion.
Second.
Second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving on to number 3 on our agenda. First action is approve community council appointments with Joanne Reich and Kelly Roy.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce to you 2 new potential North County Community Council appointments. The first one who appears on the screen there is Mr. Nicholas Sturgiotis. He goes by Nico. He's a Greek American and born and raised in Connecticut, but had a lot of family in the Tarpon Springs area. My dad always said, if you're named Nick or George, you're welcome to move to Tarpon Springs. So he began actually after getting a degree in social work. He began working with the National Conference for Community Justice as a youth program specialist. He then went on to work in education for the Hartford Public School System for 7 years. First as a special education paraprofessional and then a student leadership coordinator, and finally as a student engagement specialist. He would visit Florida many times a year to visit with his family, and he decided to move here permanently. And his first job back here was over at the Art Club Care in Tarpon Springs as their family service coordinator. He then got recruited by the Children's Home Network Caregiver Support Services, and he is now working there as a family navigator, providing families in Pinellas County with a focus on North County with community resources and support. He has many ties to the north part of the county, and it's been great to have him attend our meetings, and we're just so happy that he's chosen to apply to be a member of the council. The second person is Maria Amato, another young woman who we're so honored to have join our council. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Master of Science in Management from USF. She's a passionate community advocate with a demonstrated commitment to improving the well-being of others, particularly within the Hispanic community in Pinellas County. She's currently a community partnership specialist at Empath Health, working to connect individuals with essential healthcare resources and services. Maria is a skilled communicator and collaborator, adept at building relationships and fostering partnerships across the diverse communities. Maria resides in the north part of the county in Palm Harbor with her husband. And both of these young adults have been attending and have been a real energetic boost to our council, and so I present them to you for appointment this morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
And Maria's here.
Good morning. My name is Kelly Roy, and I'm the Community Engagement Advocate for South County. I'm here to introduce an applicant for South County Council. Her name is Ms. Viridiana Lopez Lugo. She goes by Vidi as well. Vidi serves as the Community Engagement Coordinator for St. Pete College, SPC. She works throughout all of Pinellas County to advance the SPC strategic vision of creating better jobs, better lives, and a better community. Before SPC, Vidi worked with the U.S. Department of Education under the D.C. office as a student advocate. Here, she assisted students and families in navigating the educational system and assessing critical resources. She is honored to contribute and work alongside the Juvenile Welfare Board, its partners, while striving to ensure that all children in Pinellas County can fulfill their potential and lead meaningful lives. Ms. Vidiana is not here today, but she's watching on YouTube, so thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the board? Take a motion to accept our 3 new members.
So moved. Second.
Second, any discussion? All approve? Okay.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, guys. Congratulations, and thank you for being a part of our county boards. All right, moving on to item 3B is selecting the September 2025 board meeting dates, and that would be with our CEO, Beth Houghton.
All right, well, we managed to get our trim hearing dates set, but we were not able at that time to set our September board meeting, which generally backs up to one of the two trim hearing meetings so that you're not coming back and forth. The date that seemed to work for most was the September 22nd. So that meeting, the September board meeting date would be at 3:30 on the 22nd with the final trim hearing at 5:30. So I present that to you for action.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. September 22nd it is.
Very good. And then our next item is to adopt revised dates for our April, May, and July board meeting dates. Try as we might, we did not get the final dates from the county commission for their meetings until after we had set ours, which our bylaws say we do in September. So in order to, at least on occasion, have our county commissioner here, we worked really hard to move those dates that were direct conflicts with county commission meetings. And so we did poll all of you, and while no date is perfect, the dates that we're presenting here are those that worked for most. And so the dates would be for April, would be Thursday, April 17th at 2 p.m., so a different time of day. County Commission's busy that morning, but 2 o'clock worked. Thursday, May 15th, also at 2 p.m. And then the best date in July, which was still kind of a thin margin, was July 24th at 9 a.m. And the July meeting is particularly important because we have to set the tentative millage that's going to go into the trim notices at that point. So we'll hope those who said they could come can, and maybe some others who had conflicts drop off. So those are our three revised dates for April, for May, and for July 24th for your consideration and approval.
Okay. Go motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Go ahead.
I was curious, in the April meeting, it looks like you didn't choose the one with the most yeses. Is there a reason?
Let's see. Well, it might have been, in fact, I'm pretty sure it was, that at the time we chose, that was all the information we had. In other words, we hadn't heard from everybody, and it flipped it. Is that right, Olivia?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And, you know, I'm very open to us moving it to April 10th. You know, we have to post all of this a week ahead of time, and we try as we might, we hadn't heard from everybody. You can, on this sheet that's at your desk, you can see what you or your assistant told us at that time, so you can tell whether you're able to attend. And you're right, April 10th at 2 had 8 individuals who said they could attend instead of 7 on April 17th. Absolutely. No, absolutely. Now I forgot, we made a motion, did we also?
We seconded, yeah, but we can
Well, we haven't voted
certainly
on
amend it.
it?
We haven't voted on it. It could be amended.
So I think Brian made the motion. It's up to you if you.
Doesn't matter to me, I mean, 10th or 17th,
Okay,
does not matter to me at all.
Both dates.
so So shall we go with the 10th so that it's the more the merrier?
I'd motion to adjust it to the 10th.
Okay, so that's an amendment. You'll accept the amendment. And then, was there a second? Second. Okay, and then Jim, you can call for a vote.
Okay, all right. All in favor, aye? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right.
Thanks, Melissa.
All right, that concludes our action items. We're moving on to our presentations. And our first presentation is on autism spectrum disorder by Dr. Jennifer Katzenstein. All right.
And I wanted to just say, you all may remember, or as she begins to talk, you may remember that she was on our panel for the summit a year ago, and is, has a fancy schmancy title, but in essence, all things psychological, psychiatric, and social work at Johns Hopkins All Children's, one way or another, report to her. And as I recall, neuropsychology is your specialty.
Yes, so by training, I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist, which means that I evaluate children's cognitive functioning and ensure that they have the most appropriate treatment plan to be successful in the future. However, as Beth very nicely mentioned, thank you, we have built over the past 10 years, continue to grow all of our behavioral health services at Johns Hopkins All Children's. It's always a pleasure to be here to chat with all of you and share what's going on, not only in the behavioral health world more broadly, but also in our county. And Beth asked me to present today to give you an overview of autism spectrum disorders, diagnosis and treatment, because there is a lot of changing information and also changing resources available for our families, certainly within the state and probably their insurance carrier, that we're going to talk about today to give you an overview of that landscape. If that sounds all right. So again, thank you for having me here today. You might hear a lot about autism. In the past, you may have also heard about something called Asperger's disorder. And what's really interesting over the past 10 years is Asperger's disorder, in the book that we use as providers to make diagnoses, was removed. And so now when we talk about neurodevelopmental disorders and the autism spectrum, it's all considered one spectrum. And I'm going to walk you through today how we make that diagnosis and what the treatment looks like. But autism affects individuals from all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. It's 4 times more likely in boys than girls, but we're actually learning a lot about that. And we have one of the known experts in females with autism spectrum disorders at Johns Hopkins All Children's, because we're starting to recognize that there are more females that are going undiagnosed than males, because oftentimes the boys are the ones that are having more behavioral difficulties in getting referred earlier and then getting that diagnosis more earlier. So you have probably seen this, or at least heard about it over the past 25 years or so, really that increasing incidence and prevalence rates of autism spectrum disorders. So the last rates that we have from 2020 was 1 in 36 children will have a diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder. And oftentimes I get asked, Jen, why? Like, is it the food? Is it genetics? What is happening? Is it that we're better at making the diagnosis? It's really all of the above. We don't have a great understanding yet of why this rate is increasing. However, we do believe that there is some differences in nutrition, some differences in the way our genetics are expressing themselves, and some more genes are coming forward with an underlying understanding of autism spectrum disorders. But then we really have gotten better at diagnosing it and become more nuanced in diagnosis. So when I think back to my middle school and high school experience, there were probably a number of kids that were undiagnosed that we thought were different. They were just different kids that we were interacting with. And so this allows us to have access to care and services that they wouldn't get otherwise when we do make the diagnosis, but as a result, those rates tend to go up. So how do we diagnose autism? It's really looking at the prevalence of certain behaviors or deficits or challenges in other areas. So we're looking for 2 main areas of weakness. One is in social communication, so how well we're able to interact and socially communicate with others. And then the second is in restricted repetitive behaviors or interests or activities. So that's more of a specific interest in an area, a routine, or a sensory sensitivity that may be causing impactful reduction in the interaction in their environment. These symptoms must be present in the early developmental period and cannot be explained by another disorder. And as I mentioned, as providers, we have what's called the DSM. This Diagnostic and Statistical Manual tells us how we diagnose things, what the criteria are, and as the group that updates that changes, kind of the spectrum changes too. So just like Asperger's no longer exists Interestingly, ADD is now a removed diagnosis. So instead of it being ADD, it's actually ADHD, predominantly inattentive presentation. We just like to give things more words, honestly. But with that, a lot of the things that we think about, right, kind of evolve over time in terms of diagnoses, and our criteria for those things evolve as well. So when we talk about that social emotional reciprocity as one of those main deficits when we're making a diagnosis, what do I mean by that? I mean, it's kids who have challenges with interacting with other kids. They might play in parallel to them nearby, but don't engage in that. They're typically not engaging in a back and forth conversation that's meaningful or asking more questions, and may sometimes revolve back to their specific area of interest. So if you get them into their topic of interest, for one of my patients this week, it was the ocean. He and I could talk about anything related to the ocean for our entire session, but the second I said, well, what about your pet? It was not at all something that he wanted to talk about, and he would bring it back to his specific area of interest. So that back and forth natural conversation isn't happening smoothly. They're also not sharing of interests happening, so they're not kind of going back and forth or engaging in pretend play. So that's one of our really early indicators when kids aren't engaging in that pretend play or kind of making up that play, using their toys in a way. You know, sometimes you see kids use a block as maybe a brush for their doll's hair, and if you're not seeing those things, that's going to be one of our early concerns. And overall, really some difficulties with social interaction. I'm sure you all have people in your lives too who you say like they don't have a filter, right? And they're just saying things that come out of their mouth. Sometimes when our kids who grow into adults have these challenges, they continue to have kind of awkward and uncomfortable social interactions. They also struggle with the nonverbal communication component of those social interactions. So they're not looking you in the eye. They might look right past you. They might not use gestures appropriately either. Or another indicator is using another person's hand as a tool. So if a child takes my hand to go grab a toy to bring it to them rather than just grabbing it themselves, that can be an indicator as well. So developing, understanding, and maintaining social relationships tends to be a considerable challenge for these kids. When it comes to those restricted and repetitive behaviors, what I mean by that is really repetitive movements, what you typically think about in autism, rocking or head banging, but also it can mean lining up toys, repeating back something that you just said to them. Kids who can repeat back every line from a movie, that echolalia, but aren't able to engage in any meaningful conversation or a deeper level conversation surrounding that. They often have an insistence on the sameness, that routine, and any changes in routine can cause a significant behavioral disruption. And then they have that restricted interest, something that they are incredibly passionate about. For a long time, it really was trains. I haven't seen the trains so much. Honestly, with the advent of YouTube and the internet in general, it's been much more devices our kids become hyperfixated on. Not all kids who are hyperfixated on their devices have autism, but oftentimes our kids on the autism spectrum really do struggle with that ability to shift away from their device when they've been engaged with it. And then sensory sensitivities. So that can be anything from tags in clothes, that line on your socks being lined up just right, to food sensitivities, so any type of texture related to a specific food type that may also cause them distress or they may avoid, and so we have feeding difficulties as a result. As we move to the DSM-5, we actually move to these levels of severity as well. So you don't need to go deeply into this, but it's important for you all to know that that level 3 for both social communication and restricted repetitive behaviors is what we would traditionally think of for kids on the autism spectrum. So having very limited language and also having very significant challenges with social communication and restricted repetitive behaviors, whereas that level 1 requires some support, but not the same level as a level 3, meaning more mild. So really you can think of level 1 as mild, level 2 as moderate, and level 3 as severe. But also with that said, you may, if you have been intensely involved at all in the autism world, I haven't mentioned language yet. So previous to DSM-5, it required a language delay in order to make the diagnosis. But with our new diagnoses, we no longer utilize that language delay piece because that was a big differentiator between autism and Asperger's, and now we're utilizing the spectrum. So when we start to talk about intellectual disability and language impairment, these are specifiers that come after. So that delay in language is no longer required in order to make that autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. So you now have all been briefed on the DSM and how to make an autism diagnosis. What does that look like, though, for kids in the real world, and how do they get that diagnosis? Well, I'll tell you right now, it really is impacted by the type of insurance they have and the access to resources that they have. So interestingly, for most of our Medicaid plans in the state of Florida, our kids aren't able to get an evaluation covered by their insurance. However, it's required to have said evaluation in order to get treatment. So that's one of the major reasons why at All Children's, about 60% of the evaluations we provide in the Autism Center are free of charge, because the kids need to be able to get those evaluations in order to get the services they need. What does that look like, though? So what does an evaluation even mean? It can vary, quite frankly, oftentimes, and unfortunately, it varies by the insurance carrier. So the insurance carrier often dictates what measures need to be completed. However, the gold standard would include all of those measures, meaning a measure of IQ, meeting or developmental level or for a younger child. Multiple measures looking at autism spectrum behavior, so it's not just the social communication and repetitive behaviors, but there's called the ADOS, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, which is administered to the child and is really that gold standard. And then multiple other measures, ideally by a multidisciplinary team. So that would include a speech-language pathologist, a developmental pediatrician, and a psychologist. There are very few of those that exist in our state. We do have one of them here in the county at All Children's, and most of the time those are located at children's hospitals. In the private practice setting, you're likely going to be seen primarily by a developmental pediatrician or a psychologist to get the diagnosis. And there's really nothing wrong with that. What we want to do is make sure that there's evidence-based measures being administered during those appointments in order to have clinicians who have the skill set be able to make those most appropriate diagnoses. What I wanted to mention here too, because I do a lot of work with FSS, Family Support Services in our community, they have seen an uptick in the number of kids diagnosed with autism who have pretty significant trauma histories. And this can be an interesting comorbidity because per the DSM and truly per good clinical judgment, it's incredibly challenging to make a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder in a kid who's had early trauma because the trauma symptoms mimic the autism symptoms so clearly. And so we've been really working hard in the county and really around the region to be able to provide more of that education to our providers so that we're not seeing that overdiagnosis in our kids who've experienced trauma for autism so that they can get the treatment they need focused on the trauma rather than the treatment specific to autism. It's just an important caveat I wanted to mention because it is something that we're seeing more of, and it's something that probably is less likely to be appropriate if we haven't done a thorough evaluation. What does that treatment plan typically look like? A very much a comprehensive treatment plan across multiple areas that is going to be changing as this child develops, and we're going to talk about that especially as our kids start to get older and their behaviors get more intense if they haven't been managed early, and how are parents managing that. So a typical treatment plan is going to include some combination of speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, applied behavioral analysis or behavior intervention, medical specialists, often from genetics to determine if there's an underlying genetic concern, but also a sleep study. These kids tend to have a lot of sleep difficulties. Sometimes we get a dietitian involved as well or a feeding specialist. They're going to have ongoing follow-up from a developmental pediatrician and sometimes a psychiatrist when the behaviors become more intense and there may need to be medication management involved. And then a psychologist is often working with the family to coordinate all of this care and be able to get that behavioral therapy intervention. So needless to say, this list is long, and that's a lot for families to manage, especially when we're making a diagnosis that can already be overwhelming, and the amount of intervention that that child might need can be quite a lot. And that's when they're little, right? And when they're struggling with their behavior, we can contain them, and they may be hitting and kicking, but it's not punching a hole in the wall, and it's not hurting another person. And so one of the biggest challenges that we have, especially for that behavior intervention piece, not only in our county and state, but across the country, is what to do when these kids get physically bigger and older. And so more often than not, unfortunately, it means law enforcement involvement. Because the parents are scared and maybe they're locking themselves in a room in their home while their house is quite frankly getting torn up and they're calling the police because they don't feel safe in their own home with their own child. But before we transition to that, what do we have here in the county? We have some really nice integration of early evaluation into pediatrician visits across the county. Early diagnosis for that really classical presentation is quite strong. It's the ongoing challenges for that more nuanced presentation or the one where we're looking at that level 1 that I showed you before. We have a lot of ABA providers, which is really interesting, and they really do cover the majority of our insurance carriers. However, as I mentioned before, they have to have that evaluation in order to access that therapy. So some of the ABA providers in our area have done really what we've done at All Children's and start to recognize that it's worth it to get the evaluation done to get the kids what they need, so they're doing it free of charge. We also have a really strong law enforcement training program. Across the country, we've trained now 6,500 law enforcement officers in recognition of autism spectrum in the field, and then how to de-escalate and manage that, along with additional visual supports for our officers to be able to have some resources in their toolbox when they come across kids on the autism spectrum, because there's far too many situations where we see a kid maybe rocking with a toy, it's perceived to be a gun or another weapon, and then the situation escalates because, as we talk to our law enforcement officers, they have to keep themselves safe, they have to keep the community safe, but also we need to be managing these kids differently than they would another individual they might be encountering in their daily work. The challenges that still exist, as I mentioned, for those with Medicaid, getting that evaluation, we have long wait lists because there are few providers and lots of kids in need. And so you might be waiting a longer duration than you wish. In addition, we're really working with our pediatricians across the county to be able to provide strong education in evaluation so that they can get those kids that are, in that group that's a pretty classical presentation. There's also limited therapy options beyond ABA, so that applied behavior analysis is classical for our younger kids. But again, as these kids get bigger and more aggressive, where are we going to go? And in the county in general, across the state too, many of our psychologists and therapists are in a situation where they aren't able to take all insurances in order to keep their private practices afloat from a reimbursement perspective. And so we still may be limited, not only because they aren't able to maintain their business plans and their financial needs with taking all insurances, and then that's going to limit the kids that they can see. Medicaid makes things a little bit more challenging also in the state. At All Children's for behavioral health, our psychologists and social workers actually can't bill Medicaid because the state requires that we have either an inpatient psych unit or be a community mental health center in order to do that, and All Children's is neither. So again, for all behavioral health services, about 65% of the services we provided are to Medicaid patients, and those are provided free of charge. What else is missing? To my knowledge, we have 2 developmental pediatricians in the county. There's a very significant number of open positions across the county. I've had a developmental pediatrician position open, I'm going to do the math in my head really quickly, since 2016. We haven't been able to fill it. We've had 4 people come through to interview for it over the years. We actually just decided about 6 months ago to close it and open it back up as a psychiatrist position, because it's easier for me to get a psychiatrist than it is a developmental pediatrician. And you hear about how there's a huge lack of psychiatrists as well. There's few behavioral therapy options, if you've heard me say, for older kids beyond ABA, and many might not be trained in that de-escalation and how to manage kids' behavior as they are getting bigger. There's few evidence-based evaluation programs, especially for those nuanced presentations. And then there's limited to no intensive services as our kids on the autism spectrum become adults. And interestingly, the Baker Act, basically the statutes exclude kids on the autism spectrum from being able to go and be Baker Acted, and then that prevents them from getting mental health care if they need mental health care related to potentially another diagnosis beyond the autism. So as these kids become older teens, we're really struggling sometimes to get them to be in a situation where they can be most successful, where they can live up to their highest potential educationally and in the future vocationally, and have the highest quality of life. I think, yeah, I've provided some references for you here, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and that gives you really a brief overview of autism as a whole, treatment, and what it looks like for us. But really, I will say that the issues that we see here in the county are not unique to the rest of the state and the rest of the country. We're all really experiencing the same things.
Questions from the board? Mr. McCary?
Thanks for the presentation. It really helps a lot. Couple of questions. You answered about why it takes so long to get, to get the diagnosis into the plan. But why has there been studies? Are there studies going on to explain why autism has been growing dramatically in the U.S. versus other countries?
I think that the studies are, there's so many. They are often conflicting, so we get lots of different results. And sometimes it was really interesting, it isn't about it growing just here. When we look across countries, when there is an appropriately trained, westernized kind of healthcare system, we're seeing similar increases. It's that lack of access to the appropriate assessment and intervention that prevents really us from being able to have those strong prevalence numbers. But it varies, right? So we have had a couple genes come forward that have been correlated with autism spectrum behaviors. There's medical conditions, of course, that are correlated, but those really still account for a small majority of overall prevalence rates.
Thank you.
I just had a, sorry, I'm like losing my voice. I just had a really specific question. It's my understanding that ABA is not available for kids who don't have the appropriate autism diagnosis.
It's 1,000% correct, and
So-
very frustrating.
Yeah, so I work in child welfare, and this is a huge issue that we run into on a day-to-day basis, where we're getting other providers that will recommend ABA therapy to children who don't have the appropriate diagnosis. And because the waiting lists are so long for the evaluations that are covered, either they need to be paid for by the CBCs, or we end up in situations where I'm there saying, okay, look, this doesn't address the issue, but if we get an OT evaluation, sometimes it will help us bridge the gap until we get to the autism evaluation. And OT evaluations are far more accessible than like ADOSs are.
Well, and what complicates it more, right, is intellectual disability. So what we now is intellectual developmental disorder, previously intellectual disability, previously mental retardation. Those kids may have behavioral difficulties that would improve with ABA. There is some overlap between those kids who have a comorbid diagnosis of autism. However, if they do not, maybe they don't have autism and they truly just have IDD, then they are not going to be eligible for their insurance to cover ABA for the vast majority of insurance panels, unless they get an autism diagnosis as well, which may or may not be appropriate. And if it's not appropriate, then you're in a real bind as a provider, because you're going to be preventing a kid from a treatment that you know that they need. And while I respect the OT piece, they often don't have the same training.
Absolutely, they don't. And I think one of the other struggles that we often see is that because in the child welfare system, specifically because of the strong overlap of all the symptoms, and we're talking about children who have NAS, who have more than likely ADHD, but then also, you know, the trauma symptoms, we're needing to get, what we end up getting is neuropsychologicals to rule out autism, and we struggle with finding those private providers that, again, we now have to privately pay. So it is, it's very difficult to access those services, and I appreciate the study, because it is incredibly difficult to access those services. I often think about my oldest child, he's 10 now. When he was a toddler, we got him an OT eval because he was having some sensory input stuff that was affecting his behavior. And I had him in with a private pay OT within, I don't know, a week and a half. And I constantly think about the children who are involved in the system, in the child welfare system, that don't have, it's not that easy. Yeah. And it's particularly in those early years, we're talking about, you know, months and years, that is an incredible difference for time that we have lost to address those issues with early intervention.
Exactly. Well, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, because you might seek out a neuropsych for them, but unfortunately, private or Medicaid payer, you're not going to do it without a medical condition thought to impact brain health, which is NAS would qualify, and potentially if there was, you know, shaken baby or early TBI. But if this is a typically like medically developing child, you're not going to get that either, and you're looking at $5,000 for an eval. And this is one of the big challenges we've had with the CPT team in the region as well. For child welfare, because the CPT team's budget for these evaluations basically covers one eval for one child for the entire year, so they could pick one kid. to get an
Yes.
eval.
And if anybody asked me of all of the kids on my caseload, I would say probably 60% of them, 60 to 75% of them could benefit
Exactly.
from a rule out or a comprehensive evaluation just to assess what their needs are.
Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, Doctor, thank you very much.
I have
Oh,
I have a statement I'd like
Sure.
to make, and it is really to address Mr. McCurrick's question about why it's growing. I'm not sure it is. I want to give you a perspective from a researcher where we make a distinction between a real difference and an artifactual difference. The artifactual difference has to do with our capacity to really measure, to understand, define, and measure. So as our tools are getting better at assessment, we're picking up more of these cases. It doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, mean that the disorder is growing. It may be. But the question may be, what percentage of those are things that were undiagnosed before? Because we did not have the sophisticated measuring tools. So always when we talk about something growing exponentially, is it real or is it artifactual in the way that it's been measured or misdiagnosed? And then the other comment that I would make is that when it comes to gender differences, I think a lot of times that the girls are underdiagnosed because their behavior is not as blatant. Or the boys may be underdiagnosed because acting out behavior is almost expected of them. Do you know what I mean? So you look at a class, and particularly boys of color, they assume, oh, these kids are gonna be off the wall, so. And by the way, one of the things I have found is that children will play to your expectations. You keep saying to them over and over again how bad they are and how disruptive they are, they're gonna show you that they really are. So what I'm saying, all of these things get tangled into this picture that we see, and being able to unpack what's a root cause, what's a real growth, what's a challenge in measurement, are all interacting, in my opinion, around
Well,
this
someday
population.
when we have more time, I'm also happy to come back to talk about nuanced autism if we want to go that low, and epigenetics, because I think the epigenetics piece and some of the really cool gut microbiome stuff that's coming out right now, we could dive into literature that is maybe not of interest at the moment, which I
So
totally
what
can
Right,
hear.
yeah.
What I'm really hearing is it's been there for a long, long time. We just didn't have the tools to understand it enough.
Well, what I'm saying is that that's a possibility.
Okay.
And/or our tolerance and explanation for the behavior socially is changing over time. There's
then-
so many things that are interacting here. We can look at what it is. The question of unpacking it is, why is it? And that's a lot more complicated.
So then, moving from there, saying that it's been here for a while, it was probably, could be bigger than we ever thought it would have been already. And so the real issue then goes back to potentially education to the family and parents and members to understand it, or try to at least identify something's wrong.
Absolutely.
And not deny that this is, trying to denial because they don't want
Exactly.
of
And
their
as I-
position stuff.
Right, and as I said before, there are cultural expectations of certain kinds of children. So if you're in a culture or a family where you just believe boys are just naturally gonna act out and be off the wall, you don't even recognize the pathology.
There's also the denial that says, no, that can't be happening to my child.
Oh, yeah.
Or my grandchild,
Right,
or any of those
or
things.
he's just the same as the kids who live in the 2 or 3 houses down the block, which doesn't make my child unusual. See, that even this conversation between us shows you how complicated that diagnosis.
So it says to me is that we need to be able to help train and educate the community better about what to look for.
And to pick it up as early as possible.
And I'm about to head to clinic to do just that. So you all are also more than welcome if you want to come tour or ever observe any of these. We obviously would have to get parental consent for that, but to see, you just even see what this would look like, to see what the clinics look like, we're always happy to have you in that setting. Yeah. And I'm always happy to talk more, but you might not want to hear it. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We appreciate you very much. Thank you so much. And I just want to say that I know that a lot of the things that she talked about are very true happening today. As a family member dealing with that and just getting diagnosed was over a year's time at All Children's to even get an appointment to get diagnosed. So that was over a year's time that baby went without diagnosis and without treatment because you can't get treatment without diagnosis. So there is a great need to look at autism that as a board we should be moving forward with JWB to look at ways we can assist or help with autism programs to help ease the pain for these parents that can't get a diagnosis for their very young children that are age 1, 2. And then they sit and wait till they're 3 or 4 before they get a diagnosis and start getting treatment. We've lost part of the battle at that point, right? Because what are we pushing in turbo babies? Their brain develops in the first 3 years. Well, what are we doing when we leave this kid sitting without help for a year and a half and not getting that diagnosis and getting those treatments that it needs? So, Doctor, thank you very much for your presentation. And certainly I'd like to see us as a board and as JWB move forward to assist in autism in the way that we can. All right. Thank you. All right, next up is, on our presentation is Workforce Stabilization Evaluation by Karen.
Hi, good morning. Karen Bogus, Chief Program Officer, and I'm here this morning to talk about workforce stabilization. Back in April of 2022, JWB Board approved funding specifically at our programs for workforce stabilization. Our programs were really struggling at that time. That was right after the pandemic, and providers were having to close sites in some cases, or long wait lists were being created because of workforce issues. So we have been in this process where Round 1 programs were first funded in April of 2022. Round 2 programs were funded in the spring of 2023. So we have been evaluating the programs over this time period, and today I'm going to share the results of both of those rounds, some provider insights, and possible next steps. What did we fund when we did workforce stabilization? We funded increasing salaries and benefits, additional staff positions, professional development and training, administrative costs, and operating costs that were associated with any new positions. Every quarter, our providers have to complete a survey. So we have over 1,900 positions considered that we're reviewing in this survey. 81% of them are direct care positions. They are the preschool teachers, they are the youth development staff in our out-of-school time programs, they are therapists, in our community health centers, they are tutors and such like that. 19% of them are management positions. So Round 1 programs, we provided funding to 22 programs, about $4.7 million, just under that. And the focus at that time was many of our out-of-school time programs, as well as our early learning centers when parents were trying to return to work, and we're very challenged with that, with wait lists and stuff. In addition, we had some behavioral health and parenting education support at that time. What we've seen, we look at lapse as one of the areas when we're evaluating this. So 50% of the programs had a reduction of lapse in their first year of funding. The second year, what we saw is 68% of the programs had a reduction in lapse and almost 4%. When we look at this chart, we group the programs by their sub-program type. And our goal is always for our programs to have under 10% in lapse. And this has been very challenging over these last several years. And so what we see here, and oftentimes when we provide additional funding, it takes time for programs to be able to spend those dollars, whether that be hiring new staff, and many of this, some of this work was hiring additional positions. So when we see this, we're looking, we see some of our categories have been able to reduce. Some of them have been able to reduce, or stay below the 10%. When we talk about behavioral health, we see some specific challenges in this area. And I know, we have our staff, Becky Albert, who is very involved in our children's mental health initiative. And one of the things here is that what we're seeing is that legislation was passed, and there is a new work group designed to be addressing behavioral health. Dr. Courtney Witt was selected, and she is leading the lead at the Florida Center for Behavioral Workforce at USF, and our staff have been in touch with her. Let me move to the next slide. One of the areas that we're seeing some positivity is the length of stay. One of the things we always talk about here is consistency of staff, how important that is as a teacher in a classroom, as a therapist, as an out-of-school time youth development staff. And so what we see here is from year 1 to year 2, an increase in those who are staying 3 years or more. I know I'm seeing it at my son's after-school program. Round 2 program, so this was in 2023. We had 34 programs with a little over $7 million. As you can see in this grouping of programs, we had a lot more different subtype programs that were involved. And here what we're seeing is after year 1 evaluation, 68% of the programs had a reduction in lapse and nearly 4% in that first year. So this is interesting as we are in the second year, what information will come about for those programs. When we look at the same chart that we saw in the year 1 and the sub-program types, again, we see a little bit of mixed results, always trying to reduce lapse and get below the 10%. Here we're seeing in the first year a nice percentage of 3 years or more of the staff retaining in the program. We also ask in the provider survey, what are separation reasons? And this pretty much hasn't changed in the 2 years that we started this. So almost 50% leave because for higher compensation or improved benefits somewhere or a career change, and then you can see the others below: relocation and lack of advancement in professional development, seeking full-time employment. A number of these positions are part-time positions, especially our out-of-school time positions. So we asked the providers also, what are some continued barriers that you are having? And so a big issue is affordability issues across our community, and a number of employees needing to relocate. Competitive pay and full-time hours, compensation, childcare and child development, associate requirements. So a number of our programs have some specific certifications or requirements that are needed, or behavioral health programs, licensing that's required. And so some of this does hinder some of the hiring. Training and short-term employees. So the minute we train staff and then they leave, we have to start that process all over again. And finding qualified applicants. Some of the successes that our providers are seeing is increased staff engagement, and we're seeing that with the 3 years or more retention in our programs. Some of our programs say that the JWB funding that we provided does and has helped attract and made their staffing positions competitive. Professional development, really supporting the staff, and the conversation we just had before about autism and the behavior challenges that many of the providers and programs are seeing, and really helping support the staff and coach them and train them in these areas, especially over the last few years where we're seeing increased behavior challenges. Staff morale, flexibility, and engagement of the community are all successes. So next step, we'll continue to evaluate round 2, assess our investment on our return on investment, and we continue to hope to influence other funders in this process. I open up for questions.
Any questions from the board? Comments? Okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our Chief Executive Officer's report. Chief Executive Beth Halvin.
Yep, we're rocking and rolling through this meeting, guys. This is good. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day on January 20th, the JWB Board, Community Council, staff, and their families had a presence in the community from Tarpon Springs to St. Petersburg. I'm thrilled to share that during the 39th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Awards Breakfast in St. Petersburg, our esteemed chair, you can see up there, the Honorable Patrice Moore was honored with the Humanitarian Award for her service to her community achievements and leadership. And St. Pete College president and friend of JWB, Dr. Tanja Williams, was also recognized with the Leadership Award. Plus, 25 students, including Mikhail Morris, Jordan Moore, and Aaron Shepard, who are part of our JWB Youth Leadership Committee, were 3 out of the 25 students who were awarded scholarships. This powerful annual event is hosted by the National Council of Negro Women, the NCNW, St. Petersburg Metropolitan Section. It's always very well attended and always a privilege for us to participate in. JWB also participated in the St. Pete MLK Dream Big Banquet and Parade, where our Turbo Babies campaign and its pit crew members spread our 0 to 3 message. We were also at the Tarpon Springs MLK Day Breakfast and Parade and the Clearwater MLK Day Breakfast event that is sponsored by the National, there's North County. I see a board member there too. Sponsored by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP Clearwater Upper Pinellas County branch. So we were all over and as appropriate spreading the messages about Turbo Babies. On January 29th, I had the honor and the privilege of sharing remarks at the Shirley Proctor Polar Foundation's ribbon cutting for the newest Master Kids location at Gibbs High School. The Master Kids program is built around a literacy plus STEAM curriculum and focuses on foundational skill development in English and in math. JWB, over on the far left, you see Bridget Heller, who's the secret sauce to all of this, I think, although she's training up all of her people. JWB provided $345,000 to help fund this expansion, and I can't help but look back at Shirley Proctor Polar Foundation's first funding proposal. For me, it was within days of starting at JWB and the first time I was sitting through a funding presentation. We were hearing proposals and preparing recommendations to the board for a new literacy initiative. Bridget Heller, who's up there in green, had returned to her home community after a very successful corporate career. She and her family had raised money to pilot over a 3-year period this carefully researched approach to raising reading abilities in low-income communities of largely African-American children. So you talk about investing from the heart. They paid for that so that, as she knew, they would have 3 years of data in order to present. So that fall in 2019, Bridget and her family presented the program and were requesting funding to be able to expand that program beyond the pilot stage. I have to say, particularly looking back, it was a leap of faith for JWB to fund a program that had been in existence for 3 years and hadn't been at the scale that it has become. But the data of what they'd done and how they'd done it, combined with Bridget's presentation and clarity around why she was doing what she was doing, were very compelling. And we're so glad we did. They've been incredibly successful. The Master Kids program has served 881 participants since 2020 and consistently exceeded its targeted service levels since fiscal year '21. Last year alone, they served 214 kids. In fiscal year '23, the most recent year for which we have these data, 81% of the youth were from low or very low child opportunity index areas. And satisfaction rates were and continue to be incredibly high for the program. 89% of participants expressed program satisfaction on the out-of-school time survey. And remember, they're doing pretty heavy academics. They try to make it fun, but nevertheless. So for the kids themselves to say that is pretty amazing. And that was 4 points over the target of 85%. The program's outcomes also indicate strong engagement in school. 86% of the participants missed less than 10% of school days, and 75% attended 70% or more of this program days, which is excellent. So the celebratory event grew quite a crowd. You may see in some of the pictures. It was joined by the St. Petersburg Mayor Ken Welch. The city made a commitment of $1 million over a 4-year time period, so $250,000 per year. And probably 8 months ago, Bridget had come to us and said, we really want to expand to the Gibbs location. And we said, well, you've got these few remaining small licensure issues at one of your other locations. None of them were serious, but they needed to be cleaned up. And we were by far the most significant funder, if, very high percentage. So we said to her then, clean up the licensure pieces and diversify your funding and we'll talk. They did it. So during that time, they fixed the licensure issues and engaged the city of St. Pete to be a significant partner, and then we can walk alongside them in our contributions. So, but besides Ken Welch, you see right there our school superintendent, Kevin Hendrick, and another foundation that they've been able to engage, the MBJ Foundation, and the founder and board chair, Maren Jenkins. We also see the Gibbs High School principal, Barry Brown, City Council Vice President, Lizette Hanowitz, and of course, Shirley Proctor Puller Foundation CEO, Bridget Heller. Other notable guests included St. Pete Chief of Police Anthony Holloway, Pinellas County Director of Education and Youth Opportunities, Dr. Sharon Brown, Pinellas Community Foundation, Duggan Cooley, Florida's Unique Education Learning Support Board Member, Kayla Mayhew, and Pinellas County School Board members, Katie Blacksburg, Caprice Edmond, and Laura Hine. This program has a lot of fans. I was proud to represent JWB and to help celebrate the success of the Master Kids program and its contributions to a really optimistic future for the kids that they serve. And I don't know, Kevin, if you'd like to, Kevin's very keenly aware and educated about this program.
Sure. This is their third location now. They started, I think, with that first allocation at a church in St. Petersburg, and we went and visited it in 2019 and saw suit to expand it to the Campbell Park Resource Center, which is attached to Johns Hopkins Middle School, and we leased them space there and really tried to get them to do this sooner and wanted to see that expansion, because there's so many partners who will tell you what's not right with kids and the reading scores are not right, but there's very few that step up and say, here's how we'll help. And they do that, and they're very, very successful with it. And so we push them to expand here, and we're actually looking forward to an even future expansion next year at another location. So they do a great job, and we see the results. Almost every child in the program attends our schools.
Thank you. And then I'm pleased to share that I've been appointed to the Tampa Bay Thrives Board. Tampa Bay Thrives champions mental health advocacy through legislation, community partnerships, public education, and so on. And given JWB's focus on children's mental health, I'm excited to continue to support work around these most important mental health challenges and issues faced by our local community. Tampa Bay Thrives, I would say the board tilts a little Hillsborough versus Pinellas, and didn't, and until I joined, didn't have somebody who was all in on youth mental health. But I'm in very good company as a member of this board, and I'm sure you'll recognize some of the names. The chair is John Kouros, the president and CEO of Tampa General Hospital. Vice Chair Chris Majeski is with Raymond James. The secretary of the board is Suzanne McCormick, who is president and CEO of the YMCA of the USA. And the treasurer, David Otati, is president and CEO of Advent Health West Florida Division. And some of the other board members include Tracy Brown with the Hillsborough County Public Schools, our good friend, Dr. Yuli Cho of the Florida Department of Health in Pinellas County, Stephanie Connors, who's the CEO of Baycare Health System, Ashley Dietz of the Florida Philanthropic Network, Carl Harness with Hillsborough County, Phil Lee, who is the I think area president for Florida Blue, and many others. But it's a group of people who have the juice to make things happen, and I look forward to working with them in that way and keeping youth mental health at the table and under discussion. Well, Dr. Morrison Rodriguez is here, and we are with mixed feelings announcing her retirement. Her last day, yeah. I don't think there are mixed feelings on her part, though. I don't know. We are sad to lose her as a close colleague, but I am happy for her and the freedom that retirement will bring her. Her last day here with us will be May 9th, and that afternoon at 3 o'clock we'll have something going on, and I know that's going to include music and some dancing, just so you know, because every single employee picnic, we have a number of our staff who, if the music's on, they're dancing, but frankly, nobody can outlast Barbara. They'll quit after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and she's still going. So Barbara has agreed to continue consulting with us after she retires, just as she had done in the years before she came on staff with us. Her experience, her expertise, especially in evaluation, and her subject matter knowledge in so many arenas have been of great value to JWB. And then Linda Latour, our senior manager in accounting, is also retiring this year, and that will be effective March 31st. During an outstanding career spanning 21 years with JWB, Lynn has been the cornerstone of our accounting and finance team, consistently delivering excellence and leading always with integrity, accounting and reporting excellence, and dedication. So sometime before March 31st, Robbie et al. will plan that. We'll be honoring her achievements and express our gratitude to her as she begins this exciting new chapter in her life. When we know the dates, we'll let you know so you can join the party. And I also have some promotions to share, and each of these will be effective March 16th. Karen Bogus, who has been with the Juvenile Welfare Board for 19 years, is promoted to Chief Operating Officer. Over her career, she's become more and more valuable to the work that we do for children and families. In her new role, Karen will lead the performance of the following units that will be reporting to her: program administration, that now reports to her, community engagement and community collaborations, who have also reported to her, the Family Service Initiative, and effective May 10th, after Barbara leaves, performance and evaluation, as well as Dr. Gail Ingraham, who has reported to Barbara, who has to date mostly focused on that 0 to 3 think tank and age group and new programs we brought on. But given an incredible strength she has in family engagement, Gail's work will probably shift to spend more time on the family engagement element. Megan Seals, who has been with us for more than 13 years, she started as an intern, is promoted to Director of Performance and Evaluation. She joined us as a research assistant and has risen in responsibility throughout the years, not only in the department in which she worked and then led, but across the organization. She's a go-to person. So that unit oversees the outcomes of our funded programs and more recently now also of our initiatives. In this new broader role, Megan will continue to lead this team of 11 staff folks who monitor 100 programs, as well as several collectives and collaborative initiatives. And then on the right on this slide, you see Elaine Melchiotti, who is promoted to Director of Program Administration. She's been with JWB for 2 years, but her background includes more than 22 years in human services, and 19 of those years have been in supervisory positions. That program administration team includes 10 staff people overseeing 100 programs, and the execution of all of those contracts and contract amendments as appropriate, plus multiple other types of agreements, MOUs and others, ensuring she and her group ensure contract compliance and the assurance that quality services are being delivered. So that includes site visits as well as other kinds of sort of surveillance. Just in the few years since she's been here, she's restructured our tiered approach to reviewing our programs, both monitoring and the progressive discipline processes, so that in some, we're spending more time with the programs that need the time and less time with those programs who are rocking and rolling without a lot of assistance, so that we can better use our time in the right places. So I am very excited about each of these amazing leaders taking on new responsibilities. They're well equipped to continue growing with the Juvenile Welfare Board as we work for Pinellas children and families. And then soon, we will begin a search for a Chief Communications Officer. We're seeking an individual who has strong management skills, along with knowledge and executive experience across more the governmental and nonprofit world, since we're not marketing for selling more widgets, but we are doing things like public education campaigns and brand awareness for the Juvenile Welfare Board. So strategic communications, including all of our internal and external communications, our Turbo Babies and other campaigns, in addition to public policy, will all report to this new position. So we, so we will not have that Chief Administrative Officer, we will have a Chief Communications Officer. And the piece that didn't really fit there was HR, and so we have already moved HR under the CFO. So Sabi and her group are already working with Robbie, and we think that's going to make a lot of sense. On Saturday, February 8th, JWB's Children's Mental Health Initiative joined forces with the JWB Youth Leadership Committee to host a Growing Hope Mindfully Unwinding pop-up event. That's kind of a mouthful, but it was focused on kids. The morning provided fun activities for the youth, including things like rock painting and crafts and things that can be calming if that's the kind of stuff you like to do, and to explore a variety of ways that youth can relax and nurture their own mental well-being. So special thanks to the City of Pinellas Park, who always show up for us, for hosting this pop-up event in their Public Works building, and to the members of our own Youth Leadership Council for their part in organizing the event. So almost finally, I'm very pleased that Judge Moore and I will be joined by Dr. Tanja Williams tomorrow at the 2025 Children's Summit on the SPC Seminole campus. Starts at 8 in the morning. I hope to see all of you there. I think we got positive RSVPs from all but 2 of you, so things happen. I know you can't always attend everything. It will be a full house again tomorrow as we debut last fiscal year's annual report video. And instead of a keynote speaker, what we're going to be doing is a Cahoots game, and that's essentially a trivia game that you do off of your phone in answering questions that are put up on the screen. And the questions are a combination of things we'd like everybody to know about children and their development and their risks and issues, as well as what some of JWB or its partners are doing in those spaces. So we're hoping everybody walks out with a bit more knowledgeable about kids and kids in Pinellas County, but also knows a little bit more about JWB and what we do. So thank you for those who've already registered to attend, and we have a significant number of our employees, whether it's their job or not, who will be volunteering tomorrow to make that happen. And then I just want to mention Becca Teeter, our Director of Public Policy, and Becky Albert, our Director of Strategic Initiatives with a special interest in children's mental health, and I were up in Tallahassee yesterday, or the last 2 days. We joined Mental Health Day at the Capitol, which was coordinated with the Florida Behavioral Health Association, of which we're a member. We attended much of FBHA's annual meeting, and we also visited a number of our legislators' offices in that time. So not much has been going on the last month. Thanks.
Just a little busy. All right, thank you. Any questions for Beth? All right, let me just say, take a minute to say thank you to both of our retirees for your time of service, everything you've done for JWB. We greatly appreciate everything you have done.
One comment?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, the first contact I had, I was thinking about it with JWB, was in 2006 when Jim Mills was the director at that time. And so I've worked in one capacity or another with every CEO that you've had up to that. Sometime, as a consultant, in and out and so on. So I am very wedded to this organization. And even though I am stepping down in this role, it is no means that I'm not going to be engaged with JWB one way or the other. I have seen a lot of growth, a lot of development, a lot of change. I've seen my colleagues go from being interns to now executives. And I will just tell you that in my long career, I have never seen an organization like JWB and the work that JWB does and the dedication to it. And so my affiliation with this organization has been my honor.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's been an honor having you here with us as well. And congratulations to our other 3 who were recently promoted. That's fantastic. Congratulations. Okay, with that, we're gonna move on to information items. Anybody have anything they want to bring up? Seeing none. All right, we're in open agenda. Do we have any comment cards? No comment cards? Anybody anything to bring up for the board? All right, we'll move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
What about your anniversary?
Oh, sorry. Whoop, on adjourn the meeting. We missed the anniversary. It's not on the agenda, so I skipped right past it.
I was speaking on.
We do have the anniversaries.
So upset. All right, so January anniversaries that we're reading in February. Jerome Kenyard, 1 year. Jennifer Dodd, 3 years. Barbara Morrison Rodriguez, 4 years. And Diana Caro, 13 years. Yardis Garcia, 18 years.
Okay, my apologies. Now we will move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.